and welcome to ConCarolinas Television. I'm your host, Bronner and Ray. I mean, I'm Don Darrow. Bronner and Ray will not be here tonight. In place of them, there will be a 1 hour discussion about why Marvel is much better than DC. I kid. Tonight we have a very special, two very special guests who are going to be running the panel tonight. We have a very popular author and publisher from Falstaff Publishing, John Hartness, and our Con Carolina's guest of honor, Charles Chuck Gannon. We'll be talking one on one, and I could tell you all his books, but then what would be the point of this wonderful panel? So, without further ado, I want to turn it over to them. And remember, if you guys have questions or anything like that, the chat is right there, and we'll be doing a raffle around 8:30.
Hey Chuck, how you doing,
Hey,
buddy?
how you doing, John?
It's another day in paradise. I have a 6, 7 week old cat on my desk chasing a catnip mouse. So if I blink out suddenly, it's because someone being Daisy, disconnected my internet. Yeah, I'm talking about you, sweetheart. Go ahead. So, yeah. My life is run by three little furry dictators
Well, of the three
nowadays.
beings that have so far been on the screen, I think we know who's going to be the overwhelming favorite.
Oh, yeah. Like I told you, I just restarted my personal YouTube channel dedicated to nothing but the videos I take of these kittens because they're far more popular than I am. So, do you have pets? I don't.
We have one. We have a dog, Quinn, and he's a great dog. He's a not the sort of mix you'll encounter very often. It's called a Sholly, and that is a mixture of a shepherd, German Shepherd, and a Border Collie. And they're a really good mix in a lot of ways. He is extremely smart. He's on the big side for that breed. It really is big as a German Shepherd. But they're so active mentally and otherwise that it's like having a dog with ADD. There's an impulse control. They're trainable, but the thing is, it's like, oh, what comes next? What comes next? And it's sort of like, okay, calm down. So
Sounds like a dog version of me. What's next? What's next? Yeah, I just realized that we'd never talked about whether or not you had pets. So,
nope.
to the audience out there, to the internet, Chuck and I have been friends for a while. So, when the opportunity came up to have him at Con Carolinas, I was very happy. And when they said, "Hey, we need somebody to interview Chuck Gannon," and I said, I mean, interview is kind of a strong word, but I'll go hang out with my buddy for an hour and
As we so
we'll
often have.
talk. Yeah, most recently, just back in March at Fantasy.
Yeah. Yep.
That was a fun little convention. You were the guest of honor there as well, or were you special guest? Or
I was two of us special guests, I think, got promoted because Eric Flint, who I've done a lot of collaboration with, was the guest of honor. He is just now recovering from the thing which put him in the hospital, which was a stent failure, was not actually as dangerous as the fact that he had C. diff. And that has a long arc and a very nasty one. And he is, knock on wood. Well, I got my head, so I can do it there as well. He's doing well. He's doing better, but he was in no shape to come to that con. So,
well, I'm glad to hear he's doing better because it's been a rough couple of years for Eric.
Yeah,
He's had several health issues, so I'm glad he's on the mend. Looking forward to seeing that bowler hat back at conventions real soon. So let's talk a little bit about the career path of Dr. Charles E. Gannon. And I think this is the first time I've actually correctly gotten your middle initial right, because I think I wrote it as Charles F. Gannon for 3 years.
Yeah, well, considering that I'm known as Chuck, if you get an F anywhere near that name, that really brings a lot of grade school sort of memories back.
Oh,
I was when my name came up and it was the banana song, banana folk. No, you don't want to do that with me.
no.
So at any rate, and for anybody who doesn't know what that means, that's because I'm way too old. Okay, and that was a thing in the 60s and the 70s. Okay, um, but
It was also a thing in the 80s, in
yeah,
the
well,
70s and 80s.
It continued a while. And since everything is coming out retro now, who knows? Maybe this is its next, if you will, lease on life as a result
Oh
of
my
this show.
God, we might be cool at some point.
Trendsetters. Oh no,
Nah,
no, let's not go that far. Okay, let's not go
nah.
that far.
So
Um,
take us back. Take us back to 1991.
91. That's interesting. 91 is actually the year that I think I published. I had my first. That was my first SFWA accredited publish. I had other things. I think I applied for and got SFWA the next year. Was one of the first people to get it for game writing because I had those credits
Nice.
before I had fiction credits. And then I was doing work in a bunch of work came my way. I was it was a work for hire for 2 novels. Again, game support for Game Design Workshop. One for Traveler, for people who are aware of that pretty much pretty inarguably the first science fiction role-playing game, and the first one to put skills in, as which has of course since become a really dominant design
Yeah.
function of an awful lot of RPGs. And so I had one for Traveler, I had one for what's called Dark Conspiracy that they also had, and then War World, which was one of Jerry Purnell's almost innumerable anthologies that had the word war someplace in the title, had sort of hit, it hadn't hit a wall, but it had sort of written itself into a corner. I published 1 or 2 things in it. Those were my first professional credentials. And so the editor, the wonderful John Carr, wonderful in so many ways, as an editor, as a person, as a friend, he said, look, do you have any ideas? And I came up with this idea for, well, here's how we can make all of this pleasant, happily ever after stuff go down in ruins and flying gears. And so I had those 3 credit, and there's a point to this, what may seem a long story about stuff that almost no one is aware of, because there is, for anybody who's listening, who's a writer or who knows a writer or who wants to be in the field, okay, hold on now. So I have these 3 contracts. I'm in television at this time, working as a full-time freelancer. I go into the people who I'm doing that with, and I say, I gotta cut back. I gotta do halftime. They said, that's funny because we wanted to put you on salary. That's what we thought you were coming in for. And I said, I've been waiting my whole life to do this, and they said, well, that's great. Don't let the door hit you on the butt on the way out. So that was done. And then the management at Game Design Workshop changed. And for reasons that a few of us know, but are kind of sworn to secrecy not to reveal, the late Jerry Purnell, well, if you go and look at his anthologies in the early 90s, he had 4 or 5 really successful anthology series coming out, pumping out a book, in those, it doesn't sound like much now, but when you're taking a book in a series every 9 months, that's a lot. That was a lot of velocity in those days, back before electrons were a thing, or at least as big a thing, or plentiful a thing since they have no mass. But at any rate, they all stopped all at once, and so did War World as a series. So I went from being 3 novels contracted, which in 1991-92 you were made. I mean, that was you were really made in those days, and they all got canceled. And then Game Design Workshop, under its new management, had never heard of a kill fee, so I had to I politely tried to point this out, and they just said, no, we'll issue you new contracts when and if it's appropriate. And I said, I can't do that. So arbitration, and 3 years later, they finally paid off. A year later, by the way, they were out of business. So I think they were for some, I don't think mine was the only poor decision perhaps they made. None of which has to do anything with Mark Miller, who is a dear friend, the inventor of Traveler, and it's sort of its godfather, and a wonderful guy. And it was I think it was a sad day when he decided that he had gotten to the next phase of what he wanted to do, and since he's returned to it, and it endures. Traveler endures against all odds. and so many other games which seemed a lot bigger and flashier at that time. But so here's the part for all the writers. I suddenly go from, you know, pretty decent acceleration to yeah, but now you hit a wall, and it's a wall that somebody else put there, and you know, this is, I am at this point totaled, really. So plan B was to become an academic, which had always been a potential plan B. It was always plan B because it was also for me, if I was going to have kids in my life, I wanted to be able to be there more than almost any other job that I could see. And the way academic schedules work and the way your summers usually are, that seemed like a good thing to combine with a writing career. And a lot of people did it back then, but you can't anymore for a variety. You can, but it's very difficult, I think, in today's market expectation to be productive enough to
I,
do both of those things.
I think the structure of academia has also shifted to where it's difficult as well because they're using so many adjuncts
Oh,
that they're not even paying a living wage to. So
okay.
can they work them harder than
Oh my gosh. So this was surprise number 2, because it's 1992, and I say, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go get that PhD after all, and do that thing. Well, this is 92, and it's right before what you just said hits, which is that rather than replace tenured faculty, we're going to kill those lines, which are salaried lines, and we're just going to fill it in with piece labor, which doesn't have health benefits, saving
right.
across the board. So it's like I went from one external, you know, wall that I hit to right as I'm coming out. So not just to make, okay, John knows this. I'm not trying to make a lot of noise here, but I was fortunate enough to finish my doctoral as a Fulbright fellow, the first one I had in England, and did the research there, came back, defended, yada yada. I was told, and this was not exaggeration at the time. This was virtual gospel. He said, "You had a Fulbright. You're gonna have a tenure track job immediately." 3 years later, I finally get an interview for a tenure track job, and in that year, I made 137 applications.
Wow.
So the point of all this is, in that time, then I left academia. The good news was I was pretty good at it, and I could went to spoke at a lot of conventions, keynote speaker. The bad thing was that I was pretty good at it. And all of a sudden, all that summertime that I thought I was going to have, guess what? It fills up. So these were the things, and I left it in 2007. It was a wonderful experience in a whole lot of ways. I've never looked back because I always knew that this is what I wanted to do. But the thing is, you have to bear in mind, from 1992 to 2007, and I did not have books under contract when I came out. This was all you want to talk about, not giving up. You're talking a decade and a half of doing a couple of conventions, having a couple of things published in analog, working on the background of the Kane Riordan series and others, but mostly the Kane Riordan series, and just, you know, at a certain point, you either are going to turn your back on it or you're not. And I do not think I was capable of turning my back on it. So and here I am. So what they say about yeah, there's a lot of sweat equity, but what did Edison say? It's about 1% talent, 99% sweat, and
Yep.
or determination, and it really is. That said, I think that it's very easy, given the fact that everybody can publish now. If somebody wants to defer perhaps the recognition that they might have a more rewarding in every way career, let's say being an editor, than a writer predominantly. In back when this happened to me, if you weren't writing, you were working for a publishing company, because no one was, the only people publishing their own books, for those of you who you know think MTV was around with the dinosaurs. And if it was, they might have been able to dance out of the way of that asteroid, I figure. But the thing is that if you weren't writing, you weren't a writer, and if you weren't if you weren't writing for an imprint, you weren't a writer. The only
Right.
way that you self-published was what were called vanity presses. And if you were not up to snuff as far as the gatekeepers were concerned, um, you got that signal pretty loud and clear pretty early on. That said, I think it's great that we are not, at the whim and whimsy of so few gatekeepers who had their opportunity to impose all sorts of assumptions, political, cultural, publishing, blah blah blah, on the entirety of the production of the field. That's good, but let's not be naive and think that you get a good thing and there isn't a back end on which you pay. And I think that a lot of the difficulty, and I know so many people. Luckily, you are one of the people. Well, not luckily, hard work, talent, and all the rest. You're one of the folks who's in the small press and the indie area that is really making a name for themselves, really having those sales, really getting that out there. Most people, the issue of discovery. How do you get discovered? You go on Amazon. It's like, I think I might be interested in this book. You spend the next 2 weeks batting away. You might be interested in emails. I mean, how do you get discovered? It's pretty but don't give up. That's the whole thing.
And that's actually why I wanted to start there, because we've had the talk about your career path, and I kind of remembered when it all went sideways and then big hiatus. And then this little Kane Riordan series came out, and Compton Crook Award winner, Nebula finalist, awards out the yin yang, sold lots of copies. But before that, and Bain, Bain Books, Gray Reinhardt, friend of both of ours, does say that yours is one of the few books that he remembers seeing come in, that he pushed forward, that actually
Yep.
went out. And honestly, if I'm the slush master general for a press, and I've only put forth maybe half a dozen books in 10 years, and one of them is the beginning of that series, I'm still feeling pretty good
Yeah.
about my track record.
And the thing is, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But before that, you also did some co-writing with
I
Eric
did.
Flint.
I did, and
And
also with Steve White.
okay, and Bain does a really interesting thing that's almost unheard of in publishing today. It's almost like a mentorship
Yep.
program. So Eric was one of their most established top writers. Here's this guy who's written a great book, and we think he can turn into something. Let's pair him with Eric and see if we can work with him. Is that kind of how that worked out?
That is very much how it worked. I think in my case, I had this. The Jerry Purnell's, his series were with Bain, so I was already in a strange way from 15 years before. They knew I could write
On
a
the
story.
radar.
Yeah, I was on the radar. They knew that. But the big question, excuse me, is can you finish a novel? And to some extent,
Yeah.
by pairing you with somebody that they know can, whether or not whether you are novice, journeyman, or just returning pro, or whatever the case may be, if you haven't published a novel yet, they're safe. It's a safe thing, because if you break down and you can't execute on your part of it, that will become known, but they won't have a hole in their release schedule, because they've got the proven hand who's the lead writer, who will basically come and make it right. And so that was not the situation at all. The two that I came into, the book that ultimately became Extremis in the Starfire series, turned into a very large book. I would say only about 15% of the book, because it actually had been largely completed, but it was just not working. So they went back and they said, let's do this again. So Steve White, we'd met at a RavenCon, and so we'd hit it off, and then I would see him at Balticons, because when you're a writer and you're new and you don't have a lot of contracts, you can go to a lot of cons. Then
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, it makes good sense to go to a lot of cons.
absolutely.
And so I remember I was about to. This was the first. This was the first one. I was about to close my laptop down. Family was about to go on a trip for like 2 weeks, and right as I'm about to hit, this is no exaggeration. It's literally I got one hand on the back of the screen, the other hand on the power, or rather, the mouse that's going to click on the power off, and an email pops in, and it's Steve White, because I said, hey, if you ever get in trouble on that book, I'm right there. And he said, were you serious in this email? I just want to know if you were serious. And I said,
Oh,
I he said, well, would you like to do it? And so the external Chuck says, I think that would be wonderful, is what I write, and I would be honored to do it. My first response was, does a bear in the woods?
right.
Um, uh, so so that was the start of it, and before I was done with it, though, something happened in the 1632 universe. I Before this, Eric had we were at a con. We were at the sadly lapsed Lunacon, the original home of Worldcon.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and it was at this point, it was being done up north of New York City. It was in Westchester County, and I'd never met Eric before. I knew the name. I hadn't read anything in 1632 yet, but we were on a panel together, and I think he was the Toastmaster. He was there as the
Okay.
Toastmaster, and so it's a panel on writing action sequences, and so I'm talking. One of the things that I talk a little bit about was film, and that if you take a look at the way when you are moving towards an action sequence in film, and as you get into it, take a look at the pace of the cuts. You don't have any lingering shots, and the pace of the cuts go faster and faster and faster. And it's actually, there's a sort of almost kinesthetic aspect to that, which is your
Hmm.
heart beats faster. What's happening in the pace of the cuts is mimicking what the human body experiences in flight fight situations. So I sort of spoke, and at the end of probably me holding forth for a little bit longer than I just did, Eric leans over the table. He did not have his bowler in that day. He had a little more hair, but he did not have his bowler. And he leaned over, and he was, at this time, he was editor of Bane's Universe, which was a great
Okay.
market. I mean, we're talking 1990. Excuse me. We're talking 2008, 2009, and it's 10 cents a word. That was way ahead of what the SFW. Right? See.
That's better than SIFWA pro rates today.
Today is 8, I think. Right.
Yeah.
And then it was 6, and they were struggling with 7. And so he leaned over and he said, and for those of you who know Eric, you this is not a perfect imitation, but it catches the flavor. Have you sent me something? I said, no. I said, no. And he said, well, do. And so we wound up talking in the hall after that, and I said, I think I have an idea, and I sent him something that was about 25,000 words long, and but I wanted it to be in the series. I didn't want it to be. I wanted it to be something that would be used, collected in maybe one of the anthologies. And he said, I don't know how I'm going to use it, but I know I like it and I want to use it. Lo and behold, one by one path or another, that actually becomes one of the major storylines, and almost every single word got used in probably one of my of all the collaborations I've done. Probably one of the best received has been Commander Cantrell in the West Indies. And there's, for anybody who's familiar with it, in 1632, if you're not familiar with the series, it's basically about 5,000 people are swapped in time and geography with a town in Germany in 1631. And they arrive at right at the cusp, or right at the right before a very, very important battle is fought in that, and essentially they defuse the 30 Years' War. What I liked about the series was because everybody who hears war, and they come back in time, and they got cars, and it's a West Virginia town, so it's got a coal mine,
Right.
and there are at least 10 times as many guns in the town as there are people, which is not an exaggeration, and that's actually, research was done. Eric, he was a labor organizer
Right.
in Manning, West Virginia, and he knew all this stuff. He knew whereof he wrote. And but the thing that attracted me right away, and where I saw, oh, this is going to be a huge amount of fun, is because it also came back with its high school. Its high school had the biggest library in the county, and
Yeah. For
that's
anybody who
a
hasn't,
really interesting thing.
read any of the 1632 books, I highly recommend them. I've only read the first two or three, but I really enjoyed them.
Yeah.
I I have to read a lot now, um, so I can't keep up with most of the
Oh,
series that I enjoy.
that
But
same with me. It's another one of those things when you're a writer and you start writing, you don't get to go to as many cons. You also don't get to read as many books. You
yeah,
just don't. Yeah, it's not the way it works.
it's
But
funny.
anyhow, that was so that. Yeah,
You talk about getting that email that says, "Were you serious?"
yeah, no, yeah, right, yeah,
That's literally how I started a press.
really.
I had a conversation at ConCarolinas with Emily Leverett and Sarah Adams. They were shopping their first novel, and it was a co-written book called Changeling's Fall. And I had read an early draft of this book and enjoyed it. And I had passed it on to a couple of publishers that I had developed relationships with, a couple of agents. Nobody was picking the book up. They were querying, nobody was biting. So they come up to me at ConCarolinas, which, for those of you who aren't aware, is next weekend, June 3rd through 5th,
Why
at
we're
the
here?
University Hilton in Charlotte, where you can see all the Chuck Gannon you've ever wanted to see. Well,
All
no, that's
16
on his
seconds of it.
OnlyFans.
Yes, all 16 seconds of
Yeah, that's on his OnlyFans. But
it.
regardless, um, they came up to me at ConCarolinas and said, "So we can't sell this thing. We're going to self-publish it." And I responded with, "Oh, please God, don't." And they were like, "Wait, why not? You self-publish?" I said, "Yeah, I do. And I'm a huckster and a hustler. And you two are both tenure track English professors. You both hate social media and you will not make a dime. Um, God bless you. You're good writers, but if you do this on your own, you're going to lose everything you put in. I'll tell you what, try to sell the book for the rest of the year. If you haven't sold it by the end of the year, I'll publish the thing." So I get this email in December that says, "So were you serious?" And I sat back in my chair and I thought about it. I was like, I was. And that's how Changeling's Fall became the first book Falstaff Books ever acquired. And then when I started edits, I figured out why nobody bought the book. It was a simple fix.
Yep.
It was one editorial note to
Hmm.
fix the core problem. Um, but nobody was either no one saw it or no one was interested in taking the time to do it.
And I think that's it. I mean, anybody who's looking for agents, anybody who's trying to sell without an agent. I mean, the bottom line is the people who are dealing with that stuff are so deluged by submissions
Oh my
that
God, yeah.
survival is there is a direct correlation between will you survive and how much are you able to create a checklist that eliminates at least 95% of the things that come across your desk. And I developed for myself. Just it's the way to address it is it's somebody dubbed it. I think Gray dubbed it Gannon's Law of Three, which is the first three sentences, the first three paragraphs, the first three pages.
Yeah.
Each one of those represents what I would call an inflection point. The first three sentences is can this person write? Did they know not to use crayon? And if the answer to that was yes and yes, then you say, all right, I'll give it another couple of paragraphs here. Now, if at the end of those paragraphs you say, okay, I'm kind of getting hooked. This person knows whatever method they're using, whether it is that it is the poetry of their voice, whether it is they've dropped me in media res and it's working. Or they, what was it? John Varney, I think. I can't remember which book it was, but it has, I think, for sure, the most. I will not. It has the most. I don't know. Is it a great book? I don't know, but you were going to read the second line when the first line was something like, he put his legs up on the desk and pronounced, "In 15 years, the penis will be obsolete." Okay, I was going to read the next line. I don't, this is just going to happen. So somebody who gets through 3 paragraphs has demonstrated some understanding of how you hold a reader that long, with more than just. They're not just going to waste your time because they don't know how to write, period, on a mechanical level. And they know that much. 3 pages in, you start getting a sense of, are they driving the bus or is the bus driving them? And it means they know where they're going. And by the time they deliver this thing to you, they actually know where it winds up, which means something else, which means that they actually went to the end, which I would almost say that if a book ends exactly the way I think it's going to, I kind of become suspicious that I've written a mediocre book. But it should be related. You should be able to see. It's like if a you have a kid and they come out and they're your clone. You're like, to be able to see family resemblance, that's a good thing. To see a clone is more than a little bit unnerving, and you're thinking Ira Levin's Boys from Brazil, at about that moment. And by 3 pages, that they've gone to the end, they've looked at it, and they've revised the beginning in the light of that, because the direction is already present. And then the fourth third is, if I've gotten that far, I may read the famous 3 chapters, outline and 3 chapters. At that point, I am willing to now, even if I get a bobble or a gaffe here and there, I'll keep reading, because the first 3, they jump those hurdles. So I'm in. And but when you think that's how people are trying to survive and get read these days, and they never get feedback. It's just like, thanks, no. And then you go into a crit group. Now I've been very fortunate with crit groups. I haven't used them a lot, but I've used them some. But the egos I've seen and heard about, I mean, in crit groups, and it's like, God forbid you're succeeding and I'm not, and therefore am I going to lean into? And the people, God love them, it's dreams, right? So they're not even necessarily aware of what they're doing. They're protecting their dream by essentially undercutting your identity as significant competition. And so it's a
I know that we opened for Slush for unsolicited submissions for the month of February in 2019. The choice of the shortest month of the year was intentional. We hadn't been open for at least a year and a half, 2 years, and we were open for 1 month, and we received 300 submissions. We took 2.
Yep.
And we're a tiny press. We're very small operation. Okay, I might be exaggerating that a little bit. I am in the middle of doing royalties for 65 authors, so I guess we're not tiny anymore. But and that's a word that is very seldom applied to me in any direction. But
you
I
live it
can't
large,
imagine.
John, you live it large.
Right. I can't fathom what Tor or Bain or some of these much larger presses that are open to unagented and unsolicited submissions. I can't fathom what kind of insanity they get.
The job is to say no, and to say no quickly.
Yeah, and that's where I find that for unpublished or barely published authors, where conventions become very helpful.
Yeah.
Like you were talking, Eric Flint sat on a panel with you and said, "Hey, send me something." And that something's on your shelf behind you, probably.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's right there.
Yeah. You can't see my brag shelf because I'm switched over computers, so my old iMac is between me and it. But same, we all got our brag
Yeah.
shelf because
Yeah.
the stuff's hard.
and
Real
and, and
quick, I
I'm
want
glad we
to.
actually I'm glad we veered into this part of it, be- because you know, as you said, let's talk about this before we talk about Kane and the other series. But the thing is, for me, what makes and if folks are coming from
Ow!
this, what? Uh,
Someone
somebody,
was stabbing me
yeah,
in the
yeah.
thigh.
They,
This
it's like,
this is
okay, this Gannon guy,
Stevie.
this Gannon guy's gonna go into a spiel here. I better nip this in the bud,
Oh,
or
he
nip it
can't
in the
hear
neck,
you. I
as the
got my
case may be.
headphones on. I wasn't paying attention,
Oh,
so
I
it
got
was time to jump up on the
time. Yeah,
inside of Daddy's thigh and see if we can rip him into pieces.
yeah. But the reason I said this is
Oh
because
my God, there's another one. Yes. Do want to take a second to mention that we have a raffle for a free weekend pass to ConCarolinas. So if you are viewing our chat, you can see instructions there. If you're not viewing our chat, well, go look at the chat and then type in exclamation point raffle in the chat. And that's all you have to do. Just see, it's right there. It's in front of everything. Just type one raffle and you'll get entered. So that's a $50 value, and you can come hang with me and with Chuck and with all our other great guests. And I
so
will
where I
try
was
not to bleed too much onto the interview.
where I was going with all this was just that I think, the bottom line is, I think there's a huge potential for what I will call the exhaustion of hope in writing.
Yes,
And it is a little, and it happens for both people in the trad pub area and in the indie and direct to Amazon area. And in general, the folks I think who are going to, so if you're at ConCarolinas and that describes you, or that describes your interests, I would say it is I don't, I think John will vouch for me when I say I am a patient and understanding ear. Now, as a guest of honor, I may not have huge blocks of time, but I know what it's like. And I think it's very important to know that when you're trying to find your way in, however that's going to be, that people understand that people are not just walking past you. And it's one of the reasons that I think this field is so great, because it really is. If you find yourself in this field and you are not finding the attitude of pay it forward being expressed to you, if you are not experiencing the lived if you're not having the lived experience of somebody basically saying to you, look, a rising tide raises all boats, then you're not hanging with the right people, because they're
absolutely.
here. They're here. John's one. I try to be one. Most of the
Absolutely, you
people,
are.
most of the people I know, and it right now we're talking to you through a screen, but we're both going to be at a con that hopefully you're coming to, and I would say please come up and continue this conversation with you there. I'm not only open to it, I am dedicated to it, and I exhort you to do
Absolutely.
it. I exhort you to do it.
And when people ask me about competition between writers, I I ask them how many books they think an avid reader goes through in a year. An avid reader can go through 50 to 100 books a year.
Easily.
I'm fast, but I can't write that much. And I can't even publish that much. You can
Right.
buy every book we produce in a year and still have time to go out and buy a lot of extra books.
And
So
yeah,
it
I
really,
think
it's not pie at the end of the day. I mean, you're not going to run out
right.
of people who want to buy books.
Well, the pie keeps growing is the other thing.
Yeah.
There's look at what's going on with Netflix right now. Look at what's going on with video shorts on YouTube. There are so many places that narrative of one form or another is entering the marketplace. I mean, the explosion, not just in re-explosion in comics, but the graphic novel. I mean, the bottom line is, and these sort of semi-animated novels or stories that are on the web. There is a lot of opportunity out there. It is not always it is lucrative at different levels. Sometimes it isn't much lucrative at all, but there's a place to go and do the thing you love, and to get experience in it and find out what part of that dream you have fits most productively with the opportunities that are before you. Somebody once said, I think it was Seneca, he wrote that what is it? He said, luck is what occurs when opportunity meets preparation.
Yes.
And so this is one of the really important things about being determined, because it is statistically unlikely that you will never have an opportunity. The question is, have you done enough work to know what it is when it comes along, and are you ready to seize it? And
Yes.
then to turn around and not be a jerk, to because somebody made that opportunity happen for you. One of your first things, and it will be noticed, believe me, by the people who actually matter. I'm going to say this: the people who matter in this business are the people who are reaching down, not pulling down. They're reaching down to bring up. And
Absolutely.
if one of the first things you do is to turn around and reach down to help somebody else up, people see that. That does not go unnoticed. And what it means about anything else in your career is that's a person we can work with. That person is not a jerk. That person is not going to turn around and walk on my back or anybody else's back just because it gets them to the next level. And let me tell you, that's big. That's huge right there. So I know this is kind of like, I know we didn't come on as professional advice stuff, but I feel it so much for all the people who want to do this. And I just, don't give up. Don't give up.
Absolutely. You know, Jonathan Mayberry talks about creating this thing. He talks about, you've always heard of the good old boys network, which kind of keeps people out and kind of makes things very insular. Jonathan works at creating the good person network, where everyone does just that and lifts other people up and focuses on spreading the wealth because people did it for him. Now he's in a position to do it for other people. And we're both in the same boat. We've People helped us get a leg up. We want to help other people get a leg up. And that is what makes you stand out a lot of times because it's so easy to get siloed. It's so easy to
Yeah.
get in with, okay, well, I write adventure science fiction, and here's the dozen people that I know that write adventure science fiction, and why would I? And I'm not going to talk to anybody else because they don't do what I. And it's insane. It's nuts, and it's limiting, and it takes so many opportunities away. Hang out with everybody. Talk
Yeah,
to other people.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Now,
And the
your
one short
biggest
two time,
series,
pardon
I
me,
do
go
want
ahead.
to. Your biggest series is
Is
adventure science fiction.
Well,
But you're
the thing is, it's certainly got adventure components, but when you get right down to it, if you the books in the series that have already come out, the only part of the series or the universe, I guess you could say, that is really adventure more than probably what I would call, in some cases, disguised um, thought experiment hard SF.
okay.
Um, and it's adventure because there's a journey. It's because I think excitement sells, but that doesn't mean, that's the same reason that that Motrin is still good to have, but it's better because it's got some coating on it,
Yeah.
particularly if the coating is sweet. So you do some of that, and adventure makes for good pacing. All those things are advantages, I think. But for me, I'll give you an example. So there are 5, maybe more, quote, alien species in this, and this is in a huge volume of space. And the really strange thing about this in the Kane Riordan series, notice I'm not talking about the character now. I'm talking about the world, the universe in which he and others dwell, which is that if you go outside of an area that is about 450 light years in diameter, it is a great silence, total silence. Nobody
Hmm.
knows what's out there, but everything indicates that something from out there was involved in seeding things inside of this 450 light year sphere. Now, inside that sphere, you have 4 or 5 intelligences. From the first book, you're introduced to them, and there's a lot of very. These are not folks in rubber suits. I'll give you an example of one species. They're subterranean. They are mammalian, but they are egg layers, and they look an awful lot like something between a cockroach and an armadillo. The thing about them is that it was difficult to communicate with them at first because they don't they see their perception is more attuned in thermal levels of light, and hearing and sonar is incredibly important to them, so much so that one of the an example of an alien feature, their secondary sex characteristics, to the extent that they have them, are not visual in nature. They sing,
Huh.
because sound carries through the tunnels. Sound is related to the sonic, the echolocation that they do, and
Okay.
this shapes all of their conceptions of things. They have terrible agoraphobia, because
Interesting.
that means that the world above them, they're out. They call craziness sun time. Any one of their species who goes out into the sun where the predators are and there's no roof over your head, you're nuts. You're suicidal. So if this sounds like the kind of what I would call detailed world and alien building that a reader is interested in, this may be for you. But here's the thing that underlies that. Of these 5 alien species, I like putting things in that a reader will not see the first time. Maybe hasn't seen it all yet. I hope and trust to posterity. But one of the things that people said, well, if you're not exactly right, if these species aren't out there, then this book is it's fun, but what does it have to say? And my answer to that, quite frankly, is if you take a look at each one of the species, they are each an extreme representation of an ism, a human way of going about things: extreme communalism, extreme individualism, extreme aggression, extreme passivity. And I have a tendency to think that if we find ourselves in a transgen situation someday where we are not just in this, or even if we are just in the solar system, everything says we will be changing our own species. Even if we don't do it via CRISPR or the Gattaca method or things like that, the bottom line is, if you have and I think this is why The Expanse is near and dear to my heart, you begin to see the evolutionary changes of the human species because of just simply the gravity regime in which they do or don't live. And this is good. This is going to happen again and again. So my attitude is, yeah, well, it doesn't have to be exact, but I'm interested in asking these questions about what are we, and the reason humans do okay is that we are certainly the master of none of these things, but we are the jack of all trades. And there's a lot of survival value in that, and there's a lot of adaptivity in that. That doesn't mean we're not without our own very, very bad habits. But so this is why I say, is it adventure? If you want to read sci-fi adventure, not sci-fi. No, it's not. It's hard SF. You will enjoy this. I think that's fair to say. But there are layers and layers and layers, and I think whatever your interest in science fiction would be, even the big idea kind of science fiction, I'm probably more influenced by Wells than anybody else in a whole lot of ways. Certainly evident in the 5th book, and so it's fun, but it's not fast food, despite the fact that sometimes it tastes really good.
Now, you've also recently shifted gears, and your Broken World series is a pretty big departure from hard sci-fi. So tell me a little bit about where that came from and where that's going.
So as I think because you're throwing me soft pitch softball here.
You're the guest
Actually,
of
I
honor. I don't.
probably
I'll give you a pile of shit when we're in the bar.
okay. So you mean about the series? Oops. Um, I was talking about, because you were talking and you said, where did this come from? I think when we were
Yeah.
chatting, and the fact of it is that I was working on fantasy before I was working on science fiction. I mean, there are things in this book which come from ideas I had when I was 15. They have morphed so much that unless you're me, you would never see where the evolutionary trail, where it started. But there were things I wanted to explore, things I wanted to look at. So it's it's something that was a long time in coming. One of the things that I've learned from watching others, somebody gets successful and then they launch a new series in this and a new series in that and a new series in that, and they've got IPs all over the place. And very quickly they realize that because they could sell all those contracts, now they have disappointed fans who are waiting for the next damn book for 4 or 5 years. So
Yeah.
my attitude was, I'm going to do my time in the collaboration, which quite frankly had bigger advances because of the names that I was working with. Do my own thing, really get grounded in that, and also I think cut my own path a little bit. I think it's very easy to say all science fiction which has an adventure component or an action component is the same thing, and I would say au contraire. The person who's in the back of my mind through that is Poul Anderson, who was an incredible prose stylist, and I think the most meaningful and foresightful and chilling novella in our genre, but possibly that I've ever read. I've read pretty widely. Is something he wrote in 1967, I believe, called Kings Who Die, and it is I pound the table on that one wherever I go because it's just that good. And so but fantasy was always there, and it was just a matter of time of making sure that I wasn't getting myself in too many places at the same time. I've always had a full dance card. So, and I signed the contract with Bain for this in 2015. I only got a chance to start writing it the year before last. At the end of 2020 was when I finally got around to even putting anything to paper. But I knew the world, and I knew the characters, and I'd known them for years. So,
Well, I know you've been a fantasy guy for a long time because you're an old D&D nerd like me.
that is, I resent that remark. Yeah,
You
that's
represent that
exactly
remark.
right. That's exactly right.
So we're coming up on time. I want to
Mhm.
close out not only with another plug for ConCarolinas next Friday through Sunday, where you can see Chuck on a ton of panels. You can see me on God almighty cat.
You can see him on a cat.
Yeah,
The cat will
you
be
can.
squalling.
The cat will be squalling. Um, better him than me. Man, he got me good that time. But anyway, come join us at the University Hilton next weekend at ConCarolinas. But I want to close with my bastardization of James Lipton's finish for Inside the Actors Studio. So just a couple of rapid fire questions.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to try to imitate James Lipton. Okay, fine. Come on up here. Let, let's start with, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word, hope.
What is your least favorite word?
So many. Uh, but I think contempt,
Mm,
because in contempt you have the armor that will prevent you from having to hear anything you don't want to.
mm.
It's the
What
most
ex
dangerous word. I think it's the most dangerous word.
what excites you and gets your blood pumping?
Sitting down to write every day.
What's a sound or noise that you hate?
That what?
That you hate.
Hungry children crying. I've heard that.
And what profession other than one that you have had would you like to attempt?
Like forever?
No,
Okay.
for a
Um,
week.
for a week.
Yeah.
It's gonna sound crazy because you can't do it in a week. I think I'd like to fly a chopper.
Ooh, yeah. All right. I think that sounds fun. I'd be down for that. I'm not riding with you in your
I would
first week.
look if I didn't have to ride with me, I wouldn't. So I get it.
Well, Chuck,
But
thank you so much. We are out of time. If you guys in the chat and watching at home want to find out more about Chuck Gannon, you can find him all over the internet, but more importantly, you can find him a week from tonight. You can
with
find him
John
at ConCarolinas
several
with me.
times. Yeah, with John, and I think that whether you prefer an adult beverage or not adult beverage, we will probably be locatable in the bar. And I think I speak for John saying the more the merrier. And this is about opening up, not closing off. Please join us.
Absolutely. So please join us at ConCarolinas next weekend. Please find us in the bar and help yourself to a ginger ale or anything stronger. And thank you, Chuck, for spending an hour with us this evening. And thank you all for hanging out. We'll see you next week in Charlotte.
Looking for all you guys.
Peace.